a little girl appeared at the back door holding a broom. "Your wife is lying." The millionaire froze. Behind that whisper was a truth that could tear everything apart. Jonathan Beaumont stopped breathing for a second. It was as if the air in the mansion had thickened, as if the white marble hallway, designed to flaunt silence, was now vibrating on another frequency. The girl was there, alone. Her dress wrinkled, barefoot feet dirty with frozen soil, and eyes that didn't blink. "Saw her yesterday, with another man. I slept behind the pool wall because it was too cold outside." Her voice was low but steady. They kissed, laughed, then went inside together. Jonathan reached into his pocket as if searching for something, but there was nothing there. Evelyn, his wife, had just stepped out the side door in soft silk, too heavily perfumed for an ordinary afternoon. She'd said she was going to the spa. A light kiss on the cheek, her eyes never met his. "What's your name?" he managed to ask. "Callie." She clutched the broom to her chest. "I don't want anything, I just thought you should know." He tried to move, to say she was mistaken, that kids imagine things. But no words came, and she was already walking away, quietly, step by step, like she'd never been there at all. A gust of wind rattled the windows, making the chandeliers sway with a soft, almost mocking chime. Jonathan stood there, alone, feeling as though he'd just been pushed out of his own home. That night, Evelyn returned with a fake smile and a new scent in her hair. Jonathan poured 2 glasses of wine, watched the evening news without hearing a word, and smiled at random moments just to keep the choreography alive. When they went to bed, she turned her back to him too quickly. He stared at the ceiling for hours. At 4 in the morning, he got up without a sound, sat down at the home security panel. The old password for folder Archive C still worked. A hidden camera, left from the construction days, offered a partial view of the side entrance, exactly where Callie said she saw them. Jonathan hit play, and there they were, Evelyn and Richard Matson, the business partner he shared more than numbers with. The man touched her shoulder with ease. She smiled with her eyes. They went into the home theater together. Jonathan paused it the moment she slipped off her coat, and he pulled her closer. It felt unreal, cold, like watching someone else's world fall apart. He turned off the monitor and sat still, for minutes, maybe hours, thinking about the girl who asked for nothing. Callie hadn't begged for attention, didn't ask for food, didn't cry. She just said, "Your wife is lying." Deep down, Jonathan knew it hadn't ruined him. It had saved him. Because now, finally, the fog had lifted. For the first time in years, he could see things as they were. The mansion still stood, gleaming on the hill. The chandeliers, the marble, the paintings from artists he barely recognized. But something had shifted, something in the way the floor sounded beneath his steps. How silence no longer felt like an ally, but a warning. And in the midst of it all, a street girl with a broom in her hands and truth in her eyes had done what no one else dared. She knocked on a king's door and told him he was being deceived. Jonathan held a photograph he never framed. He found it in the bottom drawer, buried between old instruction manuals and faded financial reports. The photo trembled slightly between his fingers. It was from a summer in Montauk 15 years ago. Evelyn, younger, wind in her hair, the smile still light, and next to her, the woman Jonathan had truly loved before he learned to pretend. In the picture, she was holding a baby. Their baby. But it wasn't real, not anymore. Catherine had vanished without a word. And the baby never came. He closed his eyes. The memory came in broken pieces. The phone ringing, the cold news, the lack of explanation. Evelyn showed up a few months later, beautiful, efficient, ready to help with the company, with life, with everything. He let her. It was easier that way. Now, sitting in the quiet living room with the house still asleep around him, Jonathan held that photo as if it could finally answer the one question that haunted him. When, exactly, did I get lost? Outside, the window sunlight began to gild the empty golf course. The mansion breathed with automatic luxury, shades rising by themselves, ambient music triggered by sensors. But he turned it all off. He wanted to hear the real sounds, the wind, the rustle of trees, the creak of his own breath. The front door creaked. Callie. She was back. She stood on the porch, staring at the ground like she didn't want to be there. The broom was in her hands again. Jonathan opened the door slowly. She looked up. "Sorry for coming again." He hesitated. "Why?" "I don't have anywhere to go, but I don't want to be a bother. I can just stay out here. Sweep the front. Nobody will notice." Jonathan didn't know what to say. The girl had a quiet pull, a silent magnetism. She didn't intrude. She just appeared, and made him feel something he couldn't quite name. "Where did you sleep last night?" "Behind the wall. There were some blankets in a trash bag." He inhaled, slowly, like stepping down inside himself. He thought of sending her away, of calling the police, but all of that felt absurd in the face of those unflinching, honest eyes. "Come in. There's food in the kitchen." She didn't move. "I can wash the dishes after." "You don't have to do anything." She nodded. Bare feet stepped onto the marble like she was walking into a church. In the kitchen, he watched her from a distance as she drank milk and ate bread with her small hands. Careful, polite, as if each movement had been self-taught. Evelyn showed up 20 minutes later. She looked at the girl, then at Jonathan. "Who's this?" "She just needed a place for today." Evelyn smiled coldly. "Aspen isn't a place for random charity, John." Jonathan didn't reply. He wouldn't explain. Not now. Callie stayed quiet, eyes down. But as he left the kitchen, Jonathan noticed she'd washed the cup she used, left it upside down on the drying rack, as if it were part of a silent code. He was meant to understand. It was a small gesture, but it carried something massive: respect, quiet, and maybe unspoken gratitude. And that hit him harder than any accusation. The kiss she gave him that morning tasted like caution, and maybe guilt. Evelyn brushed her fingers across Jonathan's shoulders with the studied grace of someone who knew every nerve. Her lips grazed his cheek, but the kiss never landed. It hovered. It was early, but she was already ready. Light grey blazer, low heels, hair pinned up, fresh perfume. "I'm out by 9. We've got that meeting with Harper and Lane at noon, remember?" Jonathan nodded. Steady hands on his coffee, the paper on the table, but his eyes were on Callie outside, sweeping the garden with care, as if each leaf had to ask permission before being brushed away. Evelyn followed his gaze. "She's still here?" "She's leaving today." She laughed, humorless. "You can't save the world, John." "I'm not trying to save the world." Silence dropped between them with the weight of unspoken history. Evelyn grabbed the keys with a sharp motion, like slamming a door. No one else could see. On the porch, Callie looked up at him with a furrowed brow. "She doesn't like me." Jonathan forced a smile. "She doesn't like anyone who can't be useful." The girl stopped sweeping. "Why do you stay with her?" The question cracked something. He looked at the floor, then at his hands, as if the answer, or maybe the reason for years of silence, was hidden there. "Maybe because it's easier to stay where we already are." Callie bowed her head. "Sometimes the place we already are is the one making us sick." Jonathan didn't respond, but her words stayed with him, walking through the house right beside him. Later, he walked into his office and stared at the wall of certificates, photos with politicians and corporate trophies. All framed, all perfectly aligned, all lies. He took down one of the frames. Behind it, taped with old yellowing adhesive, was a child's drawing, sketched long ago by Catherine, the woman who left. A crooked heart with 3 names inside, J+C+. The third name was never written. Jonathan sat in the armchair and rested the frame on his lap. His eyes began to burn. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pain. It was a kind of longing he hadn't known still lived inside him. The doorbell rang. He got up slowly. When he opened the door, he found a tall man in a suit with a rehearsed smile. Behind him, a black car, Evelyn at the wheel. "Mr. Madsen came to pick me up," she said, stepping out of the car with that same irritating smile. "We're heading to the meeting." Jonathan squinted. The same man from the video. The same hand on the shoulder. "You're going together?" "Yes." Like always. He nodded. Of course. Madsen extended his hand. Jonathan didn't take it. When they drove off, Jonathan went upstairs. Callie was in the hallway, sitting and drawing on a napkin with a random pen. "Is that me?" he asked. She flipped the napkin around. A man and a little girl holding hands. Behind them, a house with no doors. Jonathan stared at the drawing for a long time. Then, slowly, he knelt beside her. His eyes burned again. "Do you want to stay?" "Here a while longer," she shrugged, shy. "I just want a place where I don't have to run anymore." He nodded. "Then stay." And in that moment, without a word, something broke. And something began. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to leave a like. That night, he tried to have dinner with Evelyn, like nothing had happened, and failed before the first bite. The dining room looked like a porcelain exhibit, polished cutlery, candles burning, wine quietly decanting. Evelyn arrived 5 minutes late, still in heels, still flawless. She sat down without looking him in the eye. "Did you turn on the garden heater? It smells like something's burning." He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on a spot in the carpet, trying to remember when everything had become just protocol. He tried to smile, pour the wine, ask about the meeting, but every sentence died before reaching his lips. Evelyn drank the wine like fulfilling a ritual. Cut the salmon like she couldn't taste a thing. "Is she still here?" she asked suddenly, not looking at him. "She's in the guest room. This isn't a shelter. No, it's a home. And she's scared." Evelyn dropped her fork, with a cold clink against the plate. "You're punishing me for something that didn't even happen?" Jonathan leaned in slowly. "It didn't happen. Because you're still capable of lying while looking me in the eye." She stood, pushing the chair back with aggressive grace. "If you want to throw it all away over some stray kid who showed up out of nowhere, then congratulations." He didn't respond, and she walked away, not from the house, but from any possible conversation. Later, alone, he climbed the stairs slowly and stopped in front of the guest room. The door was ajar, letting a sliver of light spill out. Callie was asleep, hand tucked under her pillow as if protecting something precious. On the nightstand, a glass of water. Beside it, the broom. She had brought it into the room, like it was something that kept her safe. Jonathan sat on the hallway floor, leaning against the wall. The carpet was soft, but it didn't dull the weight of the moment. He stayed there for a long while, listening to her breathe, trying to understand what this was doing to him. It wasn't pity, it wasn't charity, it was something else. An internal crack that strangely didn't hurt. It just let in light. By morning, Callie was on the porch holding an old notebook he didn't even know existed. "Can I draw here?" "Of course," she scribbled in silence. Jonathan watched from a distance, the way you watch a wild animal that might bolt. But she didn't run. She stayed. Trying to get back into routine, he called his lawyer, cancelled the next meeting. Spent the day at home, caught between half-written emails and thoughts that no longer obeyed him. That afternoon, Evelyn returned. Shopping bags in hand, the same surgical smile as always. "Can we talk?" Jonathan nodded. They sat in the living room. He didn't speak, just waited. Evelyn took a deep breath. "If you want a divorce, let's do this with class. No scandals. We'll divide things fairly. You can keep the house." "Do you love Richard?" She hesitated. Her gaze faltered for a second, then composed itself again. "Not like I loved you." He gave a sad smile. "That's the problem." She stood up. "The girl has to go, today." Jonathan didn't argue. He just said, "She won't." Evelyn looked at him with the first real emotion in days. Fear or anger. Maybe both. That night, Callie walked into the living room barefoot and sat next to him on the couch. "Do you want me to leave?" He looked at her slowly. "No." "Even if she tells you to?" "Especially if she tells me to." She rested her head on his shoulder, a simple, almost timid gesture. But Jonathan felt his throat tighten, because there in that silence was something he never had with Evelyn. Something you can't buy with rings or sustain with dinners, trust without contract, and that's what made him decide. He had never raised his voice inside his own house until that day. The fight began with one sentence. She needs to go. Evelyn stood in the center of the room, arms crossed, face cold. Jonathan stood before her, hands trembling slightly, like they held an invisible weapon. She's not going. And I'm not saying that to be stubborn. I'm saying it because she has nowhere else to go, and maybe more importantly, because she's the only honest thing that's entered this house in years. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. She's a homeless child, Jonathan. You're willing to risk our reputation over some moral episode? The word reputation bounced inside him like a gunshot. Do you hear yourself? This house, this life, this image we sell. What was it built on? Denial. Silence, pretending, she sneered. So now you're the savior of the oppressed? No. He took a step closer. Maybe I'm just done being an accomplice to the privileged. The silence that followed was thick. Evelyn grabbed her purse, smoothed her hair, and before leaving, delivered the line that would leave him in pieces. If you choose her, I walk out. Jonathan watched her walk to the door, and when she left, he didn't follow. He just breathed, in deep, painful, but for the first time, real. Later, he went up to the guest room. Callie was on the floor, packing her worn-out backpack. You hurt? He asked. She nodded. If you want me to leave, I will. Jonathan knelt in front of her. This isn't about what I want. It's about what's right. She looked him in the eye for what felt like much longer than a child ever should, then pulled something from the bag. A piece of red string, worn thin, with a tiny bell tied to the end. It was my sister's. She died when I was 5. She used to give me this bell when I cried. Said every sound was a good memory. Jonathan held it gently like glass. Can I keep it? She nodded, eyes misting. You can. But only if you promise to remember one good thing every day, even on the bad ones. He tried to smile, but his chest ached. That bell weighed like an old promise left unkept. The next morning, Richard Madsen showed up. No call, just walked in. We need to talk. Jonathan didn't bother with pleasantries. You're sleeping with my wife and you have the audacity to come here. Richard didn't flinch. She's leaving me. Said she wants to start over. Good luck. I didn't come to talk about her. Jonathan crossed his arms. Then what? Callie. The world spun. What about her? She's the daughter of a former employee of mine. Disappeared 2 years ago. The girl ran away from a shelter. She's smart but unstable. She's made up similar stories before. Jonathan stared at the man, heart pounding in all the wrong places. Are you saying she lied? Maybe. Or maybe she mixed things up. Trauma does that. Jonathan stepped forward. Are you just scared someone might believe her instead of you? Richard laughed. You're emotionally involved. You've lost your grip. No, I just got it back. The man left, slamming the door harder than he probably meant to. Jonathan, alone again, held the red bell. He gave it a soft shake. The sound was quiet, sad, alive. And then he understood. Maybe Callie had lied. Maybe she hadn't. But it didn't matter anymore, because she had surfaced everything he already knew, just refused to see. And the truth was, he needed her as much as she needed him. That morning the mansion felt like a hollow body. And Jonathan, the last to realize it had already died inside. The silence in the house felt different now. Not the usual kind that came with wealth. The hush of sealed glass doors and expensive quiet. This silence had a smell. Dry, still, like something forgotten. Evelyn hadn't come home the night before. Jonathan hadn't called, didn't text. It was like they'd both silently signed a temporary ending. Callie woke up early. Jonathan found her sitting on the living room floor, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the cold fireplace. The bell I gave you, do you still have it? He nodded, pulled the small object from his pocket and handed it to her. She shook it once. The sound was so faint it felt internal. My mom used to say when we stop listening to how we feel, we start screaming at everything. Jonathan sat beside her. His back ached. His soul, even more. I think I've been screaming inside for a long time. Callie rested her head on his shoulder. It wasn't a gesture you plan. It's one you allow. The day passed in a haze. The house felt cold despite the heat being on. Jonathan tried to work, but the computer felt like a useless artifact. Tried to read, but his vision blurred. The bell's sound still echoed somewhere, deep in his chest. By late afternoon, a notification popped up. Evelyn had requested access to financial documents. She was making moves. Maybe to leave for good. Maybe for another play, it didn't matter. For the first time, Jonathan didn't feel fear, he felt grief. Not for her, but for the years wasted trying to hold on to something long gone. He went down to the garage. Opened the storage cabinet where he kept old things, envelopes, folders, albums, and there it was. Catherine's last letter. Never opened. The envelope was yellowed. His name handwritten, shaky. He sat on the car seat alone and carefully tore the edge. John, if you're reading this, it's because I couldn't bring myself to tell you face to face. I lost the baby, and I couldn't say it out loud. I thought, if I disappeared, you'd move on. I'm sorry for stealing our future. I loved you, but I didn't know how to stay. He pressed the letter to his chest, as if that could delay the pain, but it came, slow, heavy, with a metallic taste, and he cried. Not like a man betrayed, not like someone disappointed. He cried, like someone finally recognizing his own guilt. Upstairs, Callie stood on the staircase. She said nothing, but she came down slowly, sat on the floor of the garage near him. Did you lose someone? He just showed her the letter. She didn't ask to read it. Didn't try to comfort him. She just picked up the bell, shook it gently, and said, "Then remember her now." Jonathan closed his eyes, and for the first time in years he didn't feel anger or shame, just longing. When they went back upstairs, it was already dark. Callie went to bed early. Jonathan stayed in the kitchen, watching the soft glow of the lamp, listening to her quiet breathing above. He called Evelyn. It rang twice. She answered with her usual cold tone. "Do you still want to leave?" "Yes." "Then go. But I want you to know, I'm not the same man you left yesterday." Silence. "And the girl? She's staying. And for some reason I think she's what's going to keep me standing." Evelyn hung up. Jonathan didn't flinch. He picked up the bell, shook it softly, then climbed the stairs, and slept. For the first time in years, without guilt in his chest. The smell of burnt cake was the first thing to make him smile in days. It was late afternoon when Jonathan came downstairs and caught the scent from the kitchen. Not exactly pleasant, something between cinnamon and smoke. By instinct, he rushed in. Callie stood in front of the oven, face anxious, gripping an oversized silicone mitt. "Sorry," she said, pulling the oven door open with effort. "I wanted to make something to say thank you. I saw a video online. The cake was crooked, edges too dark, sunken in the middle." Jonathan stared at it and felt something that wasn't frustration. It was tenderness. "Did you use baking powder?" She thought about it. "I don't think so." "Was I supposed to?" He laughed, a real laugh. The first since Catherine left, since Evelyn began disappearing from the inside. A short laugh, but a true one. Callie bit her lip, trying not to cry. "I just wanted you to know I like it here." Jonathan knelt beside her. "I know, and I'll buy 10 cakes if you want, but this one I'll never forget." She nodded, eyes red but steady. Little by little, they began to rebuild. Not with big words, not with promises, but with small habits. Jonathan started making breakfast. Callie tended the garden like every flower was hers. They ate soup while watching old cartoons. And on cold nights, she slept on the couch, wrapped in a blue blanket, while he read books he never finished. One day, Callie called him into the backyard. "Close your eyes." Jonathan obeyed. The wind touched his face, crisp and clean. When he opened his eyes, he saw a tiny makeshift house near the fence. Repurposed wood, curtains made from old sheets, a cushion on the floor. "I made it for me. But if you want to come in, you can." He ducked down to enter. Sat on the floor back against the makeshift wall. The wood smelled like damp earth. Sunlight filtered through the cracks. And there, in that ridiculous little space, Jonathan felt something he hadn't in decades. Shelter. "This is better than half the rooms in this house," she grinned, proud. No one yells here. That night, Evelyn sent a message. Short. Cold. The divorce is official. Digital signature in your email. Jonathan read it. Didn't reply. Instead, he walked to the grand piano in the mansion's hall. It had been closed for years. He lifted the lid, pressed a key. The note rang out, hoarse, out of tune, but alive. Callie came down, barefoot, sat beside him on the bench. Do you know how to play? I used to. Will you teach me a song? Thought for a moment, then placed his fingers on the keys, began slowly. Claire de Lune. Wobbly, but recognizable. She closed her eyes. Sounds like water. That's what they say. The music echoed through the hallways like something old waking up. A kind ghost, not haunting, just reminding. When the song ended, Callie leaned her head on his shoulder. Will you leave one day? Jonathan looked at her, serious. I think I left myself a long time ago, and now I think I'm coming back. She nodded, like someone who understood more than she should. The next day, he left early, went to a downtown store, bought paints, fabric, wood, came back with a plan. We're fixing up the old studio in the back. Let's make something new. Callie jumped with excitement, grabbed the paints and started sketching ideas. They spent hours in that old space. Once Evelyn's studio, now reborn under fresh colors. The walls bloomed in pastel tones. The floor was scrubbed clean, windows flung open, letting in air and light and light. It was a reconstruction without hurry and without masks. It was the beginning of a new home inside the old one. The walls started changing color before the paint even dried. Evelyn's former studio, now a workshop, smelled of fresh paint, sanded wood, and new life. Jonathan woke early just to open the windows and let the light flood the space that had once been locked away. Callie spent hours drawing on the floor, spreading out sheets and paints in neat color-coded circles. As if by painting, she was reordering the world in her own way. This wasn't just a structural renovation. It was a rite of passage, with every nail driven, every shelf reorganized. Jonathan let go of the version of the house that no longer belonged to him, the house of appearances. Now, everything smelled like belonging, like imperfection, like honesty. On a cold morning, Jonathan found Callie cutting up pieces of old magazines to create a mural. Is this a collage? It's more than that. It's a place to remember where I once wanted to be. He came closer. Among the clippings were images of places he'd never been, beaches, forests, streets full of laughing children. But in the lower corner, there was a photo of him. Taken from a distance. He was sitting in the garden with her. She'd taped it with gold washi tapes, like it meant more than all the others. You put me in here? It's where I am right now. Jonathan couldn't respond. He blinked, slowly touched the edge of the picture. Can I keep it? She shook her head. It stays here. That way we remember where we came from. Every day. Later, Jonathan got a call from the lawyer. The divorce process was going smoothly. Evelyn hadn't contested a thing. She seemed to want out of his life with the same urgency as a castaway jumping off a sinking ship. And for the first time, Jonathan didn't feel loss. He felt relief. He decided to do something he'd been avoiding for years, visit the grave of the child that never came. He drove to the cemetery in Montauk, took Callie with him. Didn't say much, just, I want to show you someplace important. They arrived near sunset. The sky was golden, but the air was cold. The grave was simple, a stone marker with the initials AJB. He'd never chosen a name. He placed the flowers gently on the ground, knelt and sat in silence. Callie stood beside him. She didn't touch, but she stayed. I didn't know you could miss someone who never got to live, he said. Callie answered with something far older than her years. We miss what we were supposed to feel. That's still missing. Jonathan looked at her, a 10-year-old with the soul of someone much more tired. Do you want to put the bell here for a minute? She pulled it from her pocket, tied it to a dried flower, and hung it gently on a small wooden cross they'd made right there. The soft chime swayed in the wind, and Jonathan cried. But this time, not from guilt. From redemption. On the drive back, the radio played a slow song. Callie fell asleep in the passenger seat. Jonathan drove with a lightness in his chest he barely recognized, a cautious peace, like something deep inside was whispering. "You're safe now." Back at the mansion, he realized he didn't mind the echo of the walls anymore. The emptiness Evelyn had left behind was no longer a void. It was space. That night, they made waffles together. She burned the first two. Jonathan ate them anyway. "Syrup makes everything taste good," she said, "even rocks." They laughed. Later, they sat on the living room floor, wrapped in blankets, a bowl of popcorn between them. They watched an old movie, the kind without a happy ending but full of beautiful truths. At the end, Callie rested her head on his knee and whispered, "I wish I had a dad like that." Jonathan didn't answer, but he ran his hand gently through her hair, a reply made of skin, not words, and in that small, silent gesture, he signed a pact that would never go on paper, but would live forever in the touch. The final decision didn't come with yelling, but with a form and a blue pen. Jonathan read the document for a third time. The social worker patiently explained the terms. Callie had no traceable relatives. Legal adoption would take time. But the first step was temporary guardianship. He'd already filled out almost everything. Only one signature left. The paper trembled slightly in his hand, but it wasn't the weight of doubt. It was the weight of knowing this would change everything. "Can I ask you something?" he said, eyes still on the blank line. The woman nodded. "If she wants to leave, after this starts, can I stop her?" "No. The law protects her well-being. But the bond has to be mutual. She chooses too." Jonathan took a deep breath. "Then this is what I want." And signed. Hours later, he was sitting with Callie on the porch bench, both staring out at the pink sky falling over Aspen. "You once told me you didn't want anything. But if I asked you to stay a little longer? Maybe forever?" She looked at him, afraid and hopeful all at once. "Are you asking me to be your daughter?" "No, I'm asking you to be my home," she cried, for the first time since arriving. A soundless, full-body cry. Jonathan hugged her carefully, like she was made of glass and memories. The next day, Richard Madsen showed up unannounced. He held an envelope and wore urgency on his face. "You need to see this." Jonathan met him in the living room. Callie stayed in the kitchen, quietly listening. Richard opened the envelope. Documents tied to Evelyn. Suspicious transfers, unauthorized deals in Jonathan's name, fraud. She was setting you up. If you don't act now, you could lose half of everything. Jonathan looked at the documents, then at Richard, then at Callie. "You knew about this the whole time?" "I found out after she left me. I wasn't going to say anything. But when I saw you with the girl, I realized you deserved to know." Jonathan shook his head. "You betrayed my trust. You slept with my wife. And now you want to save me. Maybe because I saw myself in you. And I didn't like what I saw." Jonathan took a breath, then ripped the papers in half. "She doesn't have power here anymore, and neither do you. You're just going to let it go." "No, I'm going to let it die," Richard tried to argue, but Jonathan had already stood up. The conversation was over, and with it a cycle of decades. That night, Jonathan went out to the studio. Callie was finger painting, circles, stars, paths. "Everything okay?" "Now it is." He watched her, the way her shoulders no longer carried fear. How her smile started at the corners of her eyes. "Do you believe in second chances?" he asked. She wiped her hands on a rag. "I don't think we get them. I think we build them." Then, like closing a chapter, she reached out her hand. "Wanna paint with me?" Jonathan took off his blazer, rolled up his sleeves, and sat beside hers. He dipped his fingers into the paint, made one long crooked line across the already colorful wall. She smiled. "Looks like a path. Maybe it is." The next morning the lawyer called. The paperwork for temporary guardianship had been approved. A judge would visit soon. Jonathan hung up and walked into the garden where Callie was tending to the plants. "Wanna name the house?" She thought for a moment. "Bell House," he laughed. "Why?" "Because that's the sound that woke you up." Jonathan nodded, looked up at the hill, at the open sky, and he knew, on the land once filled with silence, a new sound had finally begun. She was smiling while sweeping the floor, but now the floor was hers. The aspen sun poured in through the mansion's open windows like never before. The air smelled like fresh bread and dry paint. The breakfast table was set with 2 plates, 2 mugs, and a small bell hanging from the front door handle. Jonathan was scrambling eggs. Callie was setting the silverware. "The judge is coming today, right?" she asked in a soft voice, like she didn't want to disturb something sacred. Jonathan nodded, flipping the eggs in the pan. "Are you nervous?" "A little, but mostly at peace." She nodded, walked to the window. The garden was in bloom. A neighbor's dog barked in the distance. The backyard studio now had a carved wooden sign above the door. Bell House. Hours later, the judge arrived. A thin man, calm voice, wore an old suit, carried a sincere smile. He sat with Jonathan in the living room, reviewed the paperwork, glanced around the house with the trained eyes of someone who's seen many homes, many lives. "Are you fully aware of what this decision means? The responsibilities, the rights, the risks?" "I am, more than ever." Callie appeared in the kitchen doorway, not trying to interrupt, but the judge noticed her and smiled. "Do you feel safe here?" She nodded. "It's the first place where I can sleep and forget I'm in someone else's house." The judge jotted something down. After a short conversation, he said, "My recommendation is positive. The next step is formal adoption. But until then, you're legally responsible for her." Jonathan thanked him. When the judge left, he and Callie stood silently on the porch. She squeezed his hand. "Can I call you Dad now?" He turned slowly to her, eyes misted, but his smile was steady. "If you want to." "I do." That afternoon, they painted a banner and hung it above the studio door. "Family lives here." It wasn't decorative. It was the truest sentence they could write. Later, Jonathan went down to the basement. There was an old box he'd avoided for years. Inside were letters, photo albums, remnants of another life. He pulled out the last picture of Catherine, placed it on the mantel beside a lit candle. "Thank you for showing me what love was, even if it was brief." Outside, Callie played with the neighbor's dog, wet grass, falling leaves. The bell on the front door swayed in the wind, its sound soft and clear. Jonathan sat on the porch steps. He wasn't thinking about Evelyn or Madsen or what he had lost. He was thinking about what he never knew he could have. Callie ran over, barefoot, holding a piece of cake. "There's some left for you." He took a bite. It was too sweet, but he swallowed it with a smile. "It's getting better." She sat beside him, rested her head on his shoulder, and they stayed like that, time passing slowly, their breathing falling into rhythm. At the top of the hill, the Beaumont mansion now looked smaller, more human. The walls no longer echoed with emptiness. The luxury no longer screamed. It whispered new stories, and then, with a simple gesture, Callie held his hand and said, "Do you remember when I swept the front steps for the first time?" "I do." "Today was the first time I swept the floor and felt like it was mine." Jonathan squeezed her hand. "It is yours." Inside, the bell rang softly in the wind, a bright, clean chime, as if it had been waiting the whole time. And in that moment, no music, no audience, no fireworks, Jonathan finally understood. The little girl who knocked on his door with a broom and a truth had brought him back to life. And now at last he lived in a home where no one had to lie to be loved. Thank you for reading this far, but don't go yet. On the next screen, there's another powerful story waiting for you. Click, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs it. I'll see you there.